everybody, welcome to What Culture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, on today's news, Xbox's Matt Booty talking about how the average game development time going forward will be 4 to 6 years.
The 30 frames per second debate continues to rage on.
And Nintendo have sort of had various projects leaked in regards to which movies they're doing next. We'll get to all of those things in good time. The first one being the Xbox Game Studios Matt Booty, speaking to Axios.com, written up by Video Games Chronicle, saying that people need to realize how long modern games take to make. He said, I think the industry and the fans were a little bit behind the curve on sort of a reset to understand that games aren't 2 or 3 years anymore. There are higher expectations. The level of fidelity that we're able to deliver just goes up. He cited 4, 5, and 6 year development time turnarounds, to which God of War's Cory Barlog tweeted that he is so right. It's been like this for a while. It's exhausting working on one thing for that long. Worse for the games that are 8+ years in development. A 10-year project would likely kill me. Sadly, it's only going to get longer as the hardware generations advance.
It's an interesting debate, right? Because out the gate, Matt Booty's saying this, and I thought this was kind of already well known, almost, like Cory Barlog said in his follow-up tweet. Like, this has been the case for a while now, probably since the start of the last generation with the PS4 and Xbox One. It's kind of become standard that games will take about 4 years to be made, and that's obviously only getting longer as the tech becomes more advanced and they try to push the graphical fidelity as much as possible. That's going to 5, that's going to 6. We're waiting a long, long time for games is the point now, and I think that has just become something we have accepted at this point, because I don't know about you, but if someone turns around like a big budget game in 2 years at this point, I'm kind of suspicious. I'm like, what have you done? What corners have been cut to get to this point? Is it going to be a complete, technical mess at launch? However, whether this is a good or a bad thing, I think that's the more interesting debate.
Yes, I think the thing as well that a lot of people are pointing out is that Xbox only just recently tried to commit, or are committing to the idea of 4 first-party games every year. And now they do have enough games in production if all those, if that pipeline comes together. But I think the overall, assumption that you just can't get a AAA game without waiting over half a decade is quite worrying. I think that opens up a whole conversation on just what people want from their AAA experiences. And we've talked loads about how important fidelity is in the AAA space. Obviously, the likes of Naughty Dog and Sony first party love hyper-detailed games. Yeah. I personally don't care. I couldn't care less. I only care about gameplay. So I'm all for them sacrificing, visuals and fidelity, etc. I don't need the pause on someone's face to enjoy the game itself. But there obviously is an expectation there, like Matt Booty says, as to what people will fork out for in gaming itself.
Here's the thing, right? You look at a game like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which took about 6, maybe 7 years to make, 6 years to make. That is not from a graphical standpoint, trend-setting title. It's not pushing the boundaries of what games can look like, but it is kind of pushing the boundaries of what game engines can do in terms of physics and whatnot. So for me, in the video game space, even if it's not graphics, developers will find something to push and to try to find something to kind of like leap on that will take a long, long time. So I think we get caught up on talking about fidelity and graphics and whatnot, and that is true. A lot of developers push graphical fidelity to the point where it's a detrimental feature, where it feels like they're taking too much time on stuff that doesn't necessarily matter. That's not my opinion necessarily, but it is a popular one out there. However, I feel like games just generally are so much bigger than they were. They're so much more complex than they were, and even if it's not graphics, it's going to be something else that takes that time. Like, I want there to be a sort of a middle ground. Like, I think it's fine if some developers want to take 5, 6, 7, 8 years to make a game, if that's what they want to do, if they want to push those boundaries. But I don't want everything to be like that. I want there to be variation. I want there to be games that do only take 2 or 3 years, that aren't as technically impressive, but still satisfying and still have really good gameplay, really good stories and whatnot. I want a mix, Scott. I don't think pushing in one direction over the other should be the future, no matter which side of this argument you fall on.
No, I agree. I think the middle ground going forward, hopefully, will be something like what Game Pass and Xbox are already doing with the likes of Obsidian, putting out games like Pentiment, and being able to sort of fuel those smaller ideas. I have long said over and over again on a weekly basis that I would love a selection of smaller Naughty Dog games, but still from those minds. Let Neil Druckmann, let Harley Gross, lead some sort of team or something like that, when they're in between the bigger releases. Kind of like what the Ubi Art idea was. Or what EA's originals are. I think there's a way to sort of have those middle ground games. But yeah, I agree with Cory Barlog that devoting 10 years of your life to one thing that might also bomb, something like Suicide Squad, that game's never going to recoup its money.
No.
And there's hundreds of people who have worked on that across the last 10 plus years. So yeah, I would hope for a middle ground.
I don't mind it as long as the industry changes along with this kind of realization. Like Cory Barlog is a great example because when they made, well, his team, Sony Santa Monica made the new God of War series, they opted out of making a trilogy because they just realized it wasn't going to be satisfying if people are waiting 15 years to see a story arc through. So they made the most recent God of Wars a two-parter and crammed everything into that second game to kind of finish off that arc. There'll of course be more God of War games, but that Norse mythology era is kind of done.
Yeah.
And that's quite interesting, I think, that like they looked at the reality of game dev and like kind of adjusted in accordance to that. That's why I like this kind of middle ground, because you know me, Scott Tilford, I don't want those big games to go away. Some of my favorite games ever are those lavish blockbusters where you can feel every kind of minute spent in them, you can feel every dollar put into them. Your Red Dead Redemption 2s, your Naughty Dog games, and I don't want those to go away, but I also don't want them to be the only thing that I eat, because I'm going to be waiting 5, 6, 7, 8 years between meals.
I think that's my thing, is I would love, however they do it, and you can sacrifice graphics, you can sacrifice whatever you want to get back to the level of turnaround that we had across the 2000s with the likes of Naughty Dog, with the likes of Rockstar. Is that possible at all? I don't know. And would would people respond to that? It's interesting. Something like Game Pass in terms of a distribution model does shake that stuff up as well, because you would fundamentally get those titles in front of people. If it was the new game from Double Fine or whoever it is, or the new game from Rockstar, maybe they would put it out on different platforms to get it in front of people. I still think that would sell. I just have in my gut, I want to believe that if you just put the Rockstar logo in front of something, even if it was, I don't know, something that isn't standard, I still think people would check it out.
Nah, man, they didn't buy Max Payne 3, did they? They did not buy Max Payne 3.
Why
did no one buy Max Payne 3?
That was a marketing thing, though. People hated little bald Max Payne, but it's the best one.
Well, here's the thing. Like you said, though, I think it kind of not disproves your point, but proves that they need something more than just a name.
Yes.
People aren't going to buy Suicide Squad because it's got Rocksteady's logo on it. People aren't going to buy Max Payne 3 because it's got Rockstar's logo on it. And that is kind of a shame, because I do think Max Payne 3 is a quality game, but I do think maybe as customers, and I'm involved in this myself, we've been kind of, we've been taught that the best looking games are the games that are worthy of your time, and I don't think that is true, but there is something to that, and Rockstar now, with GTA 5 and GTA 6 and Red Dead Redemption 2, they're known for that kind of level of detail, and I wonder whether if you take that away, it would result in less interest in their products. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing. We'll have to see how this stuff shakes out. I think there is an ongoing debate around fidelity and around just how big your productions need to be qualified as AAA games and how much they sell systems. Speaking of selling systems, Starfield got a massive showcase at the Xbox Showcase itself and its own Starfield Direct, or whatever the hell we're calling it. But one thing that came out of that was the fact that it's going to be running at 30 FPS. Now, I think this is a wider conversation, but Starfield specs are that it'll be running at 4K 30 FPS on Xbox Series X and 1440p/30 FPS on Xbox Series S. Now, the wider conversation here is whether big AAA games are settling back into a 30 FPS mold. Richard Lever, who's from Digital Foundry, did a whole article on this at the end of last year, just talking about how frame rates are the sacrifice necessary to maintain fidelity and maintain really good solid visuals, which is the whole conversation around Starfield. Todd Howard just saying, look, this is a conscious decision. We want the game to look absolutely gorgeous, and we're aiming to nail a 30 FPS frame rate.
Yeah, I mean, it's, right, I think with the latest, crop of consoles and the fact that it took a little while for them to get off the ground in terms of having pure exclusives, we became accustomed to the idea that everything could be 60 frames per second, or would at least have a toggle. But now that we're in the proper true era of next-gen exclusives, or at least we're getting into it this year, it feels like, that kind of option is slowly going away as the teams start to optimize towards 30 FPS, because like you said there, and like all of these experts have been saying, these developers kind of want to push fidelity as much as possible, because like I said, that's kind of like what sells. That's become the indicator of a next-gen game, rightly or wrongly. So for me, this was always kind of going to happen, because we even saw it last generation when we started getting remasters or early games that would kind of put in 60 frames per second mode. For instance, look at The Last of Us Remastered that had the 60 frames per second, 30 frames per second toggle, and everyone was wondering whether, Naughty Dog would keep that for The Last of Us Part 2. Right. They didn't. It was back to 30 frames per second because they wanted to push the fidelity, they wanted to push the detail. And I think in the console space, at least, they're always going to do that, and whether that is what you guys want and what we want, that's again, the more interesting conversation. It's is that kind of optimization good for the industry, or is it kind of like a holdover from marketing and what we perceive as next gen?
Yeah, for me, it all comes down to feel. I think that a solid at 30 FPS, if it's completely locked down, doesn't move at all, even a couple of frames, I still think that can feel very good in terms of a gameplay experience. We're throwing in here that Digital Foundry is also co-hosted by John Linneman. He reacted to the Starfield news and the specific frame rate news, saying that given the scope of Starfield, this is perfectly acceptable. If they can just smooth it out to deliver a steady 30, that will be just fine. So the two people from Digital Foundry who are obviously the go-to industry maestros when it comes to this stuff are kind of accepting a 30 FPS future.
I know I'm just one guy on the internet, but it's just fine for me, and that's because I've always just played on consoles. I like playing 60 frames per second when I can, but like we were just mentioning, I'm a fidelity guy, so even when I have the option for new games, I'm probably going to play on quality mode. I'm probably going to play on 30. I played through Resi 4 on 30 frames per second. I played through Jedi Survivor on quality mode. I played through Dead Space this year on quality mode, all on next gen, and that's just the way I like to play it, because 30 frames per second is kind of what I'm used to, and I think it feels fine as long as you're able to maintain a solid output like you mentioned, but I can totally see why people would think of it as a step back, because like I said, in the early part of this generation, it's become normal to have all of these different options, and now it kind of looks like they're being taken away.
Yeah, there's also the fact that like if you think about what's on the box for something like the PlayStation 5, it does mention 8K, so it's like if we're never going to get 8K at 60 FPS, so it's that kind of question of what do you want to sacrifice? Do you want to sacrifice resolution or frame rate or something else? Making me think though that I'll put a poll out on the YouTube channel. You guys can all vote on that thing. Do you tend to use quality modes or performance modes? And let's just see. I want to see what people do. I think people go towards the quality modes, but I'm curious.
I think it depends on the game. Like I think like I've just said, I'd rather play on quality mode for those titles I mentioned. But if I'm playing something like, I know Call of Duty doesn't have this toggle, but say Call of Duty gave me the toggle to go into a quality mode and have that in 30 frames per second, I would never do that, because I don't want to play Call of Duty in 30 frames per second. I want that to be as smooth as possible. I think it depends on the genre, it depends on the game, it depends what you personally want out of the experience. And PC players are probably laughing because they've had the ability to tailor that experience to their own personal preference for decades now. And in the console space, it's a new thing.
Yeah, there's also the fact that like only one game so far this year, Jedi Survivor, had a phenomenal experience on quality mode, but a way more jagged, awful, crashy experience over on the performance mode, which split us right down the middle, right down this couch right here.
Well, you say that, right? Yes. But this is another issue, because I know Jedi Survivor was next gen only, and that definitely needed more time in the oven. But yeah, that worked fine enough on quality mode, but it was a bit of a disaster, like you said, on performance. But that's kind of been par for the course across the board. I love Resi 4; it's my favorite game of the year. But that thing, like, was not in a good state performance-wise. If it was dropping frames, whether you were on quality, whether you were on performance, whether you had a hair strands on, whether you had a hair strands off. You had Gotham Knights last year, which was targeting 30 frames per second and couldn't hit it. You had Redfall this year that was targeting 30 frames per second and couldn't hit it. So it's just, as long as the games are optimized, I'm fine with whatever they hit. It's just like, so many games are unoptimized right now, Scott Taylor. I am not a developer, I don't know the problem, but there is a problem right now.
Yeah, I think the solution is in optimization, because Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom does run at 30 FPS, mostly solid, until it just doesn't, and it's all over the place. But for the most part, it's not like there was a conversation doing the rounds, surrounding Tears of the Kingdom, saying it's not running very well, because for the most part, it is hitting that solid 30. Final news item of the day comes from Daniel Reitman, Daniel RPK, known leaker of various things in the movie realm, saying that Nintendo and Illumination have reached a deal on multiple Nintendo movies going forward. They'll be making the Legend of Zelda movie. I'm going to give a reaction to each one here. Legend of Zelda movie. Yay! The Super Mario Brothers movie too.
Woohoo!
A Luigi's Mansion movie.
I actually will watch that
one.
Okay,
good. And a Donkey Kong movie.
Never in a million years. Not this lifetime.
The thing with this is, if they do Donkey Kong, then assuming that you've got Seth Rogen coming back to lead the whole thing. I'm massively for that. I love his role in the Mario movie.
Well, this is a news story, Scott Tailford. Okay. Tell me which one of these you would want to see, because you like the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Love it.
Did you? Are you looking forward to the second one?
Yes.
Would you take a Donkey Kong spin-off?
Yeah, but I don't know what you do for it. But yeah. Oh, they could do Funky Kong and Cranky Kong and all that kind of stuff. Just flesh out the. Oh, you like Funky Kong?
I like Funky Kong.
Yeah.
I like Mario in his little furry suit where he's got he's like a beaver or something. What is that?
It's a Tanuki.
Tanuki Mario. Suit. Give me one of those and I might go see that.
That's in the Mario Brothers movie, but they could do way more of that. I think the big one here is the Legend of Zelda movie, because it's what do you do with that game's tone, or the franchise's tone, and Illumination have a propensity for putting random pop songs in their movies. It's the worst thing about the Super Mario Brothers movie is the 3 times that a random pop song comes in, and the fact that they did actually record proper orchestral stuff for those sequences that is on the official soundtrack but isn't in the movie itself because someone over at Illumination said, no, just put Take On Me in there instead, and it sucks.
Look, that does suck. Yeah. But I feel like, with the Super Mario Brothers movie and with Sonic, the 2 Sonic movies, I'm an outsider to this. They're not necessarily my thing. I haven't seen either of those films, but it feels like the fan response has been there. It feels like, they might throw in a crappy song here and there. They might, tailor it more towards a younger audience, but it feels like they've got the ethos of the video games right. At the very least, they've got the designs from the video games right, which, it shouldn't be celebrated necessarily, but even 10 years ago, even from Sonic's first trailer, that is not something to take for granted. That is something that they've gotten right with it.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things about the Super Mario Brothers movie is that it feels like Mario, it looks like Mario. I think all of this stuff points at the long rumored idea of a Smash Brothers movie because they're building the roster in this side of things. I mentioned the Illumination side of things and throwing pop songs in there because you're trying to make movies that work for the western side of the world and the east as well. And so I'm just curious, are we gonna have I Need a Hero while Link is getting his sword together and all that kind of stuff?
Again, I'm out of this. If you have those moments, but you also get the Peaches song by Jack Black, does it balance it out? That also could have been cringy and bad.
Yeah.
But by all accounts, you tell me if I'm wrong, was good.
It was pretty good. I actually just, now that you've said that, maybe Jack Black plays Hestu and he has the 2 maracas.
That would be
just
cool.
Dance around a bit and then just the, yahaha.
Yahaha.
I would be massively up for that. But let us know what you think down in the comments below of the various Illumination Nintendo movies coming up, Starfield's performance, and the fact that most AAA games should take half a decade to make. Also, check out this video right here.
We're gonna be so old.
For more things. I'll be ridiculously old. I saw Zoe Saldana say that she'll be in her 50s when Avatar finally finishes, and she started it in her 20s, which is what it feels like to follow the gaming industry. For now, though, I've been Scott from allculture.com.
Macaulay Culkin's 42, I might even be older. God, bye.
Oh, bye.